Good evening and welcome to this forum for Democratic candidates running for Public Service Commission in District 3 representing DeKalb County. Public Service Commissions they were canceled this go round for 2 cycles while a legal challenge to the voting system worked its way through the courts. That litigation has been settled and now there will be a primary election on June 17th and the winner will face off against the Republican incumbent in the November general election. Good evening. I'm Steve Parker, Special Events Chair for DeKalb Dems, and on behalf of our county committee, I welcome you to this important event. Tonight, we will hear from all four of the candidates on where they stand on issues like utility bills, energy costs, fossil fuels, renewable energy, and more. We have lots of great questions that our policy and legislative team have prepared, and we hope to have enough time at the end to take some additional questions from the audience. If you have a question, place it in the Q&A section rather than the chat, and we'll look for those then. We are streaming on multiple platforms live, and a recording of this forum will be available on our YouTube channel. The DeKalb County Democratic Committee relies on donations and volunteers to present truthful information to the citizens of DeKalb. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Brandy Weish, Chair of the DeKalb County Democratic Committee. Madam Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you to everyone for being here tonight. Thank you to our four candidates that are with us this evening, as well as all of our viewers. Many of you have heard us talk about the importance of the Public Service Commission race over the past couple of months and how the current Republican Commission has put corporate profits over Georgia citizens for the last decade. Many of us have suffered under this commission. And so that is why it's so incredibly important to hear from these candidates this evening and make sure you understand the importance of this race and how it affects each of our lives. Like I said, tonight we're going to hear from four Democratic candidates for this race, and I want to thank each of them for being here with us this evening. But before we get started, I'd also like to introduce our moderator for this evening. Our moderator for this evening is Dan Wiesenhunt. Dan grew up in Alabama and moved to Atlanta in 2011. He began his career at the Anniston Star in Anniston, Alabama, and after that, he worked at the Times Free Press in Chattanooga, Tennessee, as the county government reporter. His first job in Atlanta was with the Reporter newspaper in Sandy Springs, Georgia, now called the Rough Draft Atlanta, where he worked as assistant editor and digital content manager. He then started Decatur-ish in May 2013 as a personal project. He envisions Decatur-ish becoming a news website that covers all of DeKalb County. Thank you so much, Dan, for being here, and I would like to pass it over to you to moderate our candidate forum this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Wiesenhunt. I am the editor and founder of Decatur-ish.com, and I have the pleasure of moderating our forum tonight. To our candidates, thank you so much for joining us and for your interest in public service. Real quick, just to explain what the Public Service Commission is. In 1879, the Georgia General Assembly established the Railroad Commission of Georgia to regulate railroad passenger and freight rates, services, and operations. In 1922, the legislature changed the name of the Railroad Commission to the Georgia Public Service Commission to reflect the increasing variety of services and utilities included under the commission's jurisdiction. The 5 commissioners of the PSC are elected statewide and serve staggered 6-year terms. Currently, all 5 commissioners are Republicans. The election is in November, but there are 4 Democratic candidates running for Public Service Commissioner, and there will be a primary election on June 17th to determine who will run against District 3's Republican incumbent. Tonight, all 4 candidates are with us, but before we begin, let's review the ground rules that each candidates have agreed to in advance. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to make an opening statement. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer prepared questions and follow-up questions. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer audience questions. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to make a closing statement, and please Do not call out other candidates by name and focus on the issues and your policies. The moderator and candidates we're going to be looking for our timekeeper who will signal when there are 10 seconds remaining, followed by a stop, and then we're going to move on to the next candidate or the next question. Now, before we begin asking questions, we want to give each candidate an opportunity to introduce themselves to you. We'll do this in alphabetical order, and we will start with Daniel Blackman. Daniel Blackman, in 90 seconds, please make your opening statement telling us what makes you uniquely qualified for this position. And we are going to follow that up with Peter Hubbard.
First of all, I want to thank the other candidates in the race. I want to thank the moderator. I want to thank the DeKalb County Democrats and all of you that are here and those of you who are watching on various other social media networks. My name is Daniel Blackman. I'm the former Democratic nominee for the Public Service Commission in the state of Georgia. In 2020, we made it to the runoff. Only the third time a Democrat had made it to the runoff, and the second time a Public Service Commission race went to the runoff. The first was with Lindy Miller. The second was with myself. We came within 20,000 votes of winning and becoming the first Democrat elected statewide to a constitutional office in almost 23 years. Amongst falling short, I was appointed by President Biden to serve in the Biden-Harris administration as regional administrator. I ran the 8 southern states in the United States. 68 million individuals reside in the southeastern U.S. I managed a budget that was reflective of the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which brought tens of millions of dollars into Metro Atlanta and hundreds of millions of dollars throughout the state of Georgia. It would be an honor to finish the job we started. I thank you so much for this time. Please consider my federal background, my work with the Public Service Commission, and my commitment to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Peter Hubbard.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Peter Hubbard, and I've lived in the DeKalb County neighborhood of Edgewood in Atlanta since 2015. And I went to the University of Memphis in Tennessee for mathematics and physics. I went to Johns Hopkins University for a master's in economics. For the last 15 years, I've been in the energy industry studying every aspect of electricity markets and natural gas markets and using that knowledge to prepare integrated resource plans for electricities throughout the United States. So very relevant work. Now, in 2019, 6 years ago, I formed a nonprofit called the Georgia Center for Energy Solutions. I'd encourage you to visit the website. It's georgia-ces.org. And I formed that to advocate for clean energy and the power plans that Georgia Power Company submits to the Public Service Commission every 3 years. So I'm actively involved right now in the current 2025 Integrated Resource Plan, and I'll be providing expert witness testimony next week during the hearings. So I encourage all of you to tune in to the Public Service Commission's YouTube channel. And then lastly, I'm also a solar and storage project developer, so I understand how successful clean energy projects are built in different markets throughout the United States.
Thank you. Next up, Robert Jones.
Good afternoon, everybody, and hello, DeKalb Democrats. I know you've watched me now for 2 years, kind of follow you around and talk about this campaign. We've been watching the Public Service Commission closely, probably more intensely over the last 3 years. I've tried to influence change at the commission from the outside and been unsuccessful, but I've really taken a critical eye in terms of how is the commission regulating the utility, and I've done that from my experience. My experience previously as a state energy regulator at the California Public Utilities Commission, so I know what regulation looks like when you take the policy and politics out of the process and you focus just on regulation. I spent 20 years at a regulated monopoly. I know all the behaviors, all the maneuvers that monopolies do to try to raise their costs, because when you get cost up, you get profits up. So I know what they're kind of doing out there. And I've got 8 years working at Microsoft. I went around the world helping customers move their applications into the IT data centers at Microsoft's building. I believe all of those are directly applicable experiences that are relevant to the issues we're facing right now. So I want you to experience through my election what true trustworthy public service looks like and not the facade you are sadly currently experiencing. I look forward to our conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much to the organizers this evening. Again, my name is Keisha Waits. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Like my colleagues, have spent a number of years in public service. I had the privilege of serving 3 terms in the Georgia House of Representatives, where I actually represented the very communities that are a part of the District 3 corridor, which is DeKalb, Fulton, and Clayton counties. I believe that I bring a deep sense of policy experience, as well as legislative background. I think this is needed and necessary to navigate complex contracts, regulatory frameworks, including public-private agreements. My approach to this campaign will be a data-based, data-driven, which is rooted in terms of stakeholder engagement and ensuring that voters feel that they are a part of the process. I spent 15 years serving in the federal government, and so I bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the conversation. But more importantly, like you, I've struggled with these high, expensive electricity bills, and so this is a shared, lived experience. And I look forward to the conversation tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the candidates for the opening statements. Let's get into our questions. Our first question, starting with Mr. Hubbard. Georgia is ranked fifth in the nation for utility costs. Over the past 5 years, the PSC has increased Georgia Power's customers' monthly utility bills by 11.5% between 2023 and this year. How will you approach rate increases if you are elected?
As a journalist, I just have to do a quick fact check. Um, I'm not a journalist, but in that framework, it's actually been, and I've done these calculations. The average customer actually has seen a $60 per month increase in the summer since January 2023. That's a 37% increase. So it's much larger than even it's been reported. And that information, I have it. I've shown my receipts and homework on that website I mentioned. So it is higher than has been reported. But you may have seen that in the news just a couple of days ago, the Public Service Commission and Georgia Power Company put forward a proposed stipulation agreement that would freeze rates for 3 years. That's helpful. But let's not forget that they just raised rates, as I mentioned, $60 per month in the summer for residential customers. So I'm prepared to extend that rate freeze to 2030 as a commissioner because I know how much fat there is in the system. I know how many lower cost options there are to meet load growth from new customers like data centers while maintaining affordability and reliability for existing customers. So unfortunately, some of the rate increases are baked into the cake, like the Vogel expansion that we'll pay for the next 60 years. But I know that we can do things without sacrificing reliability for less cost. And so that's how I will approach those rate increases, is holding the line and working to even reverse them if I can.
Thank you. Robert Jones. You're muted, sir.
Okay. I agree with everything Peter just said in terms of the price increases. I've been campaigning now for 7 weeks. About 4 weeks ago, I started telling audiences, look, I don't think you're going to see a price increase in 2025. I don't think you're going to see one in 2026, because quite frankly, it's too hot of an issue from a political standpoint. The Republicans don't want that in front of them. So lo and behold, what do we see 24 hours ago? This basically loose agreement that we're going to have essentially a freeze on prices with zero public input. That's kind of a surprise announcement with government presentation as now. What you're seeing right now is the politics that need to be taken out of the regulatory process. We need to have a rate case. And what they're saying is they don't want a rate case. When you have a rate case, you do deep due diligence on the expenses and operating assets of the utility. We need that to get to the bottom of, really, are the costs that Georgia Power is operating from legitimate? Are they prudent? Are they reasonable? So this is clearly a political maneuver. It does not take away from the issue that's in front of this election, is the integrity of the commissioners. They're compromised. They take money from the utilities. Let's stay focused on what the issues are that are affecting you as consumers. Thank you.
Thank you. Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. Certainly, Georgia has struggled as it relates to equitable access to energy resources, specifically in rural areas, as they often bear the brunt of poor infrastructure and high costs. The PSC has several options, I think, to mitigate the rising cost of energy, as well as the high disconnection rates that we're facing right here in Metro Atlanta. I believe that utility rates should not be a blank check for utility companies. And so my goal is to champion reforms that require greater accountability, push for investment in terms of renewables, as well as protecting vulnerable customers, such as seniors and working families. And I think we do that by expanding the Energy Assistance Program, which we know that there's a desire and an attempt to roll those back, in addition to rate structure agreements. That is a tiered process for individuals depending upon their income, in addition to greater oversight over utility spending.
Thank you. Daniel Blackman. You're muted.
Yeah, I think, yes, sir, I was actually coming off mute. Thank you so much. I think all of us would agree, and something that Mr. Hubbard said is something I stated a couple of weeks ago. So I completely agree with him on extending the freeze. I actually showed up at the press conference this morning that Governor Kemp held, and I listened very attentively while there was a shareholder meeting right down the street with Georgia Power. There was a press conference that the governor held, and I believe personally that if they're going to be serious about this freeze, and let's extend the freeze, let's look at a full audit of what we've seen over the last few years. You're absolutely right when it comes to energy burden within the state of Georgia. It has inadvertently impacted communities. So I won't spend too much time repeating what was said because I think this is one area that all of us would agree upon. The only other thing that I would add is to make sure that throughout this process, not only with the candidacy and hopefully I earn the vote to get past the primary, we need to make sure that we are educating people throughout this process and continuing to have those who are voting for us in the primary and the general to remain at the table throughout this process to hold the Public Service Commission accountable, as well as those at Georgia Power and other utility industry that have a direct impact on how this will go, how it will impact us, and what this freeze will look like, especially since I believe they'll come right back and find some way to fix costs into extending it and getting their money back.
Thank you. Next question, we are going to start with Robert Jones. Robert, how will you address cost overruns and unexpected expenses caused by Georgia Power projects?
This is a motivating factor in terms of why I jumped into the race is when I looked at the way that Vogtle was being financed. Vogtle was being financed, 40% of the Vogtle financing was money confiscated from each of us as ratepayers, while Georgia Power was delivering excess dividends to their shareholders. And that's just an anti-competitive move. Dividends are supposed to be, I have nothing else to do with my money from an investment standpoint. And so the commission sanctioned something that allowed confiscation for us to pay for something before we had the chance to receive it. So it's legal, it's wrong, I'm setting out to fix it. The whole point is, as an investor-owned utility, they have to bear the risk of their ventures. We can't be the financial backstop for them, and they've been using us as consumers as a financial backstop. So my focus is squarely on the fact that as we go forward, we're going to be seeing other nuclear projects coming in. Today, the Tennessee Valley Authority announced a small-scale $1 billion nuclear project. We'll probably see more smaller scale nuclear projects coming into Georgia as we look to decarbonize our environment. However, we cannot be the financial backstop for the utility company. If they're going to be making profits, they have to take the risk and they will bear the rewards from it if it works out. But we're not going to be the financial backstop of it. So I'm out to change the rules that benefit the monopoly at the expense of the consumer.
Thank you. Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. I fully support an independent audit, and that is we're explaining how we're spending funds as it relates to infrastructure improvement and grid improvements. When we make the decision to raise rates, which we've done so 6 times in the last 2 years, we have to be able to justify that to stakeholders as well as ratepayers. And so a couple of things that I'd like to see is for individuals when they're overruns, that those dollars go back to the community. And we do that through expanding low-income energy assistance programs, as well as expanding the buyback program for solar energy, which I think is necessary to have a conversation surrounding renewables.
Thank you. Daniel Blackman, same question.
Yeah, so my response would be first to acknowledge publicly this was a regulatory failure. It was a failure on behalf of the Public Service Commission. It was a failure on behalf of Georgia Power. When Westinghouse went bankrupt, the South Carolina project went bankrupt, the writing was on the wall. We should have seen that, we as in the state of Georgia and our 5 elected commissioners. The problem is those 5 elected commissioners take exorbitant amounts of money from the utilities in which they regulate. And it's almost as if they had a blind eye to being 7 years behind schedule and over $15.5 billion over budget. And we're going to be paying this for decades. Our children, many of you all's grandchildren. I mean, this is a tremendous problem. So the way that I believe that we can address these cost overruns, again, you're going to hear the word audit a lot today. I mean, we need to go back and look and see where those areas were. There's nothing we can do, just to be very clear about what has happened with Plant Vogtle. We can only mitigate some of the challenges and look forward. I believe with cost overruns, we need to have measures in place going forward with any construction of a new project, even in the event that they say that we want a Vogtle 5 and 6. We need to make sure that there are processes in place that are metric driven, so that when we understand how power is regulated and generated in the state, it does not fall solely on the shoulders of ratepayers in the state. That is what has happened. That's been their formula. It's been well calculated, and it's made the utility companies hundreds of billions of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Hubbard, same question.
Yeah, so the best way to address cost overruns and unexpected expenses by Georgia Power projects is to avoid those costly projects from the outset, like fossil gas projects that are simply not right for Georgia. So the regulatory oversight has to begin earlier than this reactive process of waiting to review and approve an integrated resource plan. So I intend to only provide approval for projects that are cost effective for Georgia and provide reliable, low cost energy to the grid. So for any ongoing projects that received approval prior to when I hope to join the commission, I'll use my regulatory authority to scrutinize those project reports and ask the hard questions of Georgia Power Company, with frequent reminders of their failure to keep costs constrained at Vogtle, where the promised $14 billion price tag ballooned to, most would agree, $35 billion, and I believe it's closer to $37 billion by my estimate. So we just have to make smarter decisions from the get-go, and that's how we avoid ballooning project costs from Georgia Power Company mismanagement.
Thank you all so much. Next question is going to start with Keisha Waits. The question, in the U.S., according to energy research firm Cleantech Group, data centers' energy demand will increase from an estimated 2% to about 10% by 2027. Do you support the expansion of data centers? And if so, how do we expand while keeping up with the energy demand? Starting with Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. I think it's a terrific question. And so I am not opposed to data centers. I think that's extremely important to highlight that. I am not anti-capital. I'm not anti-business. The challenge that we're having, and I think our colleagues will agree tonight, is how this has come about in the state of Georgia. We had an opportunity through Senate Bill 34, as well as another piece of legislation, to pause data centers in the state of Georgia. They bring very, very limited jobs, and they use an exorbitant amount of energy. Lastly, $296 million went into incentives to incentivize businesses and corporations to come here. That cost was passed on to the everyday consumer. In addition to the fact that the data centers in Georgia pay 40% less than the national average. And so that is the issue. So I am not opposed to data centers. What I'd like to see is a moratorium until we can change the rate structure that they are paying, so that private citizens are not paying a greater cost than data centers.
Thank you. Daniel Blackman, same question.
Look, the data centers are here, and this is a part of my background. When I was appointed by President Biden, one of the first objectives I had was to go into Kentucky, which was one of my 8 states, and look at the regulatory and implementation process of cryptocurrency as well as data mining. So I have a lot of background experience in this particular area. While I understand the ask of a potential moratorium on some of what's happening, these data centers have already created fixed agreements. They're already in these counties. They've already subverted community input. What we need to do is look long term at how we're going to implement models and put things in place that are going to be very, very adamant, number one, about protecting human health and the environment. You can Google Fayette County right now, and you can look at the overwhelming impacts on the demand on energy as well as water and the impact in those areas. When nuclear plant Vogtle was being constructed, I testified twice before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on the impacts on public health and the environment, on the impacts of those communities, including Burke County, Georgia. And we have to do the same thing. We have to scrutinize these projects up front. Look, I have, teenage and adult children that use Snapchat and Instagram and Meta and Microsoft, but we can no longer have the increase of demand without processes and metrics in place that can protect the ratepayer in Georgia. Every time there was a new construction, a new project, a new idea, or a new opportunity, we can no longer expect public financing up front. We have to make sure we protect the best interests of ratepayers while strengthening our grid and protecting the investments around Georgia.
Thank you. Peter Hubbard, same question.
Yeah, so I think that a public service commissioner needs to balance the economic interests of the state, customers of Georgia Power Company, and business in Georgia. So, data centers can bring needed sales and use tax revenue up front, quite a bit, actually. They're expensive to build. And they can also bring property tax revenue over the long term. Now, this is all, the Georgia economic development authorities across many different counties will offer a lot of abatements, so that's a big issue there. But in theory, you're getting a good tax revenue benefit. So I'm for that injection of tax revenue into the community. But they do also consume a lot of power. They require significant upgrades in power grid infrastructure, and they consume a lot of water. There are many, many lower cost options that we can use to bring these new customers into Georgia and meet their new demand and load growth while allocating the costs for those power grid upgrades squarely on those new customers. That's part of what the IRP and leading into the rate case does, and that's why I'm active in those areas. There are also a lot of good options to reduce or even eliminate water consumption, like district energy and heat pumps and using partially treated wastewater. So there are lots of good options to keep costs capped, and I intend to use my authority as a commissioner to keep them capped.
Thank you. Robert Jones, same question to you.
Full disclosure, I'm very partial to data centers. My time from Microsoft, I understand data centers, but I've also watched the evolution of artificial intelligence within data centers. So AI, I'm very optimistic about, and at the same time, I'm a bit scared and concerned about. And all of that's going to take place in data centers. I believe the AI coming out of these data centers are going to bring forth some medical breakthroughs that are going to be incredible in terms of transformative for society. At the same time, we need to get regulation around AI. And right now, AI is going wild without regulation. The AI producers have asked for regulation. Government has not stepped up for it. And so I need to get on the commission to bring my insights. And we actually put some structure to prevent the community from harm of what's going on in the data centers. Specific to your question about the energy to power those, recall that in 2023, where Georgia Power filed an emergency IRP, yes, that's right, 18 months ago, they entered into a settlement agreement with the Clean Energy Business Association. That agreement was structured in such a way that the SEBA group was basically going to power data centers with clean renewable energy in exchange for them not stepping into the current IRP. And so they are quite, I'm not sure how to describe it, surprised at the amount of fossil fuel burning that Georgia Power has put forth, and probably are feeling like, you know what, they made an agreement not to step in this case. At the same time, Georgia Power is not fulfilling the agreement they had before.
Thank you so much. And that is actually a great segue into our next question, which we will start with Daniel Blackman. Daniel Blackman, with technology advancements like AI, how would you regulate the financial costs and potential pollution from these advancements?
Look, that's a huge question on data, and I think that I would lean specifically on my background on the federal side with the financial costs. We have to make sure that we are looking at data from a very unique perspective without putting that demand on ratepayers. And I'm probably going to answer this question a little bit differently than my colleagues may, but the reason why I take this approach is because I saw firsthand what the federal government did right and what they did wrong in investments, but also looking at these projects. What I would like to see is us to take a perspective where we do similar to what they've done in the state of Michigan, creating an Institute of Public Utilities. Now, this is something outside of my purview. I would like to make sure that we're engaging research centers, institutions, and organizations to help us get data on the financing and infrastructure side that can help us with the implementation overall.
Thank you so much. Peter Hubbard, same question.
Yeah, so as a commissioner, I intend to use my regulatory authority to hold the line on the financial costs that are caused by data centers and other customers. So that rate case that we were expecting to be filed right after this integrated resource plan here in 2025, which will now likely be canceled with the stipulation agreement, which is another topic, to keep that 2022 rate base intact. We're not going to have that increase for the next 3 years if that goes through. But the fact of the matter is that the Public Service Commission is feeling the pressure from interveners like my nonprofit at, again, www.georgia-ces.org. And they're feeling pressure from Georgia Power Company customers with these skyrocketing power bills. So holding those financial costs is really an exercise in exposing, starting again from the very beginning with the right projects, not costlier ones, to help meet the load growth of data centers and to help with the advance of technologies like AI. And the other part of that was the pollution part. Really, they do consume a lot of power. The best way to reduce their impact in terms of emissions as data centers and other AI type technologies is to simply decarbonize the grid and remove the fossil fuel from it. And that's the work that I've been doing for the last 6 years in front of the Public Service Commission as an intervener.
Thank you. Robert Jones, same question.
To regulate the financial costs, it's essentially to go ahead through with the rate case and do a deep examination of exactly where the costs are landing on which set of customers and holding them responsible for it. And so the regulatory process is pretty well defined to go execute that if it's done well, and it's done really with integrity. As far as the potential pollution impacts of it, it'd be nice to be able to say, well, just don't use fossil fuels to go ahead and fuel these data centers, but that's not the case right now. So given that, we need to understand that Georgia's become the regional hub now of data centers, but all these data centers are not just for Georgia. They're going to be serving Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida. So the pollution costs of us burning fossil fuel are going to be borne on us as Georgians, but the benefits are going to be dispersed across the region. We now have ways to measure and financially track what is the cost per carbon ton that's put into the atmosphere. That explicit cost needs to be factored into the calculation from a rate case standpoint. And we need to make sure that, in fact, the utility is not allowed to profit on that, but in fact, the utility is penalized on that to basically discourage this behavior of trying to use fossil fuels as a way to basically prop up profits. All of that can be done through the regulatory process if you have a apolitical regulator who's sitting there and looking at it from a business standpoint who understands the issues versus someone who's chasing partisan politics. That's why I want to get on here is take that noise out of the system so we really get serious around the business of regulation here.
Thank you so much. Keisha Waits, last word on this question.
Thank you so much. I think this is where we utilize our partners in the Georgia General Assembly to put legislation in place to ensure that when individuals come here to Georgia or want to do business in Georgia, and I'm specifically referring to data centers, that they are responsible for environmental impact assessments. And through that, for those areas that have been harmed, specifically Sparta and Jackson and Douglas, where we have this rapid expansion, they're paying the cost. Lastly, the $296 million that we've given out in incentives, we want to make sure that versus extending and expanding those incentives, that we're putting those funds back into the communities that are directly impacted by these costs. So as it relates to pollution, it is my belief that if companies come here and they have an impact on these communities that where they're polluting, we need to make sure that they're picking up the tab. I think BioLab is a great example of that in Rockdale County, where there was much disruption. And so it is my hope that when companies come here to do business, it's built into the cost benefit agreement, in addition to the fact that we are including environmental impact studies for those who are impacted the greatest.
Thank you so much. Next question, we're going to start with Peter Hubbard. Peter, do you support prohibiting stipulated agreements between the Public Service Commission and Georgia Power until after the hearing process is completed?
This is a question that directly impacts me and the work that I do at the Georgia Center for Energy Solutions as a nonprofit intervener before the Public Service Commission. The reason why I started it in 2019 is so that I could have a say in these integrated resource plans and try and steer them in a better direction. What I've discovered in just sort of forcing my way into this process is that you can do it all the right way. You can intervene in the formal sense and ask to be included in these sort of secret negotiations that are happening, but they simply lock you out of the process. And so that's really why I'm running is as a commissioner, you now have a lot more authority, certainly discovery rights, through public interest advocacy staff and others. You can ask questions, you can dig into the details, and we just don't get that right now until there's a sort of baked product that comes out of the oven, the stipulation agreement. No one, very few people were aware that there was going to be a surprise stipulation agreement, a couple of days ago from the 2022 rate case. So it's a secretive process, and certainly I've tried to participate in it, and it's a very difficult thing to do. As a commissioner, I'll be able to participate much more directly. And so I do, believe that we should wait until we've had a full hearing and have a full participatory process to reach that stipulation agreement.
Thank you. Robert Jones, what do you think? You're on mute, sir.
I'm not even sure I want stipulated agreements after the hearing has been completed. I mean, if you look at the regulatory process, there's some gaming that goes involved. Utility comes in and they ask for the stars. The interveners come in and they start reeling the utility back in. And as they basically are making points, the utility jumps and says, let's go have a backroom conversation and see if they can settle on the moon. And so, quite frankly, it takes the commissioners out of the role of having to make some tough calls around all the key points that are made. So the stipulated agreement process is really a backroom deal. It's not transparent. It doesn't feel like, in fact, it's more like a negotiation behind the scenes to make life easier for the commissions than a true discussion of the hard facts that come down to a rate case. And right now, the public is excluded from the process. So I'm not sure if I like stipulated agreements at all. I'd like to put the commissioners on hook to having to vote exactly point by point if they support or disagree with the utility is putting forward and what interveners are putting forward so we can get it on the record.
Thank you. Thank you. Keisha Waits, same question.
Sure. Many of us have started a project, or whether you're building a home or building a deck, and you've had cost overruns. The contractor will tell you that it's going to cost X amount of dollars, but because of different reasons, it may or may not go up. I want to take us back to Plant Vogtle. Units 3 and 4 suffered massive cost overruns, somewhere to the tune of $35 billion. Again, this cost was passed on to Georgia taxpayers. So I don't have a problem with the stipulated agreement. The question is, once we realize that there are some challenges or it's compromised, what do we do next? And I think one of the things that we can do is ensure to the voters and the ratepayers that those costs will not be passed on to them going forward. So I think the first step is that we end any type of incentives incentivizing data centers because they're already here. Georgia right now is a hub for them. And then we expand programs to help those that are most vulnerable and who've had the greatest impact as it relates to rising cost of energy. So I don't think the stipulated agreement is the issue. The question becomes is after the fact, and if it's in fact not ineffective, or they have not agreed to the terms that were set, I think we need to go back and revisit those agreements. And there needs to be penalties and accountability moving forward.
Thank you. Daniel Blackman, you'll have the last word on this issue.
Yeah, I'm going to take the stance of agreeing with prohibiting stipulated agreements only with the reestablishment through the legislative body of the Consumer Utility Council. I think that the public has been excluded far too often. When we talk about stipulated agreements across the board, these deals that are being made too often have been impacting people at the local level. Ratepayers have been overwhelmingly left out. Many of you all may not know, and I'm talking to the general audience, that of the 5 commissioners, there is a dedicated Public Service Commission staff that is supposed to make recommendation to each of the commissioners on these particular areas, including deals, docket cases, and multiple other areas. I think that, having full participation across the board is important, but I also believe that we have for a very long time, as a matter of fact, since Sonny Perdue was in office, have not had a Consumer Utility Council that was funded at $480,000 and was probably the closest thing we had to a consumer group that can oversee what is happening in these agreements. I think there are too many deals behind the doors. I think the Public Service Commission has absolutely no transparency. I think they have acted as bullies in this process. They have not given even a recommendation or consideration to the concerns of the public. And I think we need to make sure that when these deals happen, the ratepayers are protected across the board.
Thank you. These next few questions are going to focus on clean energy, and we're going to start this one with Robert Jones. Robert, what is the appropriate mix of fossil fuels and renewable energy sources Georgia Power should use to generate electricity for the next few years?
So ideally, it should be the smallest amount of fossil fuels possible and the largest amount of renewable resources possible, because we have to basically now transition to a decarbonized, clean environment. A specific issue relevant to this election that I'm watching very closely is the fact that each of us had $450 confiscated from our pocketbooks to go fund Vogtle. Vogtle is identified as a clean energy source. You can kind of question that or not. The key point to keep in mind in the discussion that's not occurring is data centers want clean energy. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they have net carbon zero objectives. Their executive compensation is tied to it. They don't want coal, okay? They don't want that coal burning emissions on their scorecard. Well, we paid for Vogtle. So when we look at really the distribution of clean energy, if I'm sitting on the commission, I'm going to press to make sure that the Vogtle kilowatts are distributed to the consumers who paid for it first before it goes to the data centers. These issues are not getting discussed. Georgia Power is shying away from them. And so we need to start having a true serious strategic conversation around energy development, energy distribution, and really what's being fair and reasonable all the different customer classes. I'm afraid right now with the commission that's have in place right now, we're going to be stuck with coal and the data centers are going to benefit from it. And that won't be fair and that won't be right.
Thank you. Keisha Waits, same question.
Georgia ranks 17th in the nation as it relates to high energy bills. And I believe that burden is oftentimes passed on to communities that are in low income and marginalized areas. I believe that the PSC has a duty to prioritize healthcare. And so obviously the obvious answer is as minimal as possible. But I just want to highlight again, most times the communities that are greatest impacted are communities of color. These are poor and impoverished communities. And so for that reason, I support environmental assessments or impact assessments so that we can determine what damage or what pollutants are done so that we can begin the business of cleanup. And I think we do that through cost community benefit agreements when individuals come to our state. So as minimal as possible is the answer.
Thank you. Daniel Blackman, same question.
Well, look, if you asked me this question a year ago, I would, be very, very excited about the opportunity for us to expand renewables, not only in the state of Georgia, but throughout the Southeast and around the United States. The bipartisan infrastructure law included $27 billion of federal investment through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that allowed, while Brian Kemp likes to tout Georgia being the best place to do business, it would not be if it had not been for federal investments under the previous administration for the strengthening of organizations around this state like Q-Cells, deploying solar, opening the door for rooftop and community solar, opening the door for battery storage. I think the question specific, we need to make sure that we can have as much of a balance as possible. I would like to see by 2035, at least within the decade, us increase significantly our investments in renewables. What we're seeing with the current administration is a rollback of every single structure, opportunity, and investment that could make our communities healthier. And the people that suffer the most in these areas are not just the ratepayers, but specifically senior citizens on a fixed income, young men and women that are in rural Georgia that are struggling with asthma. I grew up with asthma. I know how bad it is on some of the hottest days where emissions are high and we're struggling with good air. So I think we need to overwhelmingly be committed to making sure that across the board, there's an energy investment that supersedes our investments into fossil fuel and is very, very serious about moving Georgia in the right direction.
Peter Hubbard, you'll have the last word.
So this point was made, but it deserves being reinforced. Customers want clean energy. The data centers, they want clean energy. And if we build fossil plants that will be locked in for decades, the customers will go elsewhere. But also, more importantly, us, the residential customers of Georgia Power Company and residents of Georgia, we want clean energy. We don't want fossil energy. So the answer is, what's the appropriate mix? It's as much renewable energy over the next few years as possible. Now, as someone who's been deep in the weeds on electric grids, I know that you can get to 50% renewable energy before maybe you need to make a few upgrades to account for things like intermittency. You can get all the way up to even 80% before you really start to see more upgrades needed. We're at 7%. That's what I say when I mean that there is plenty of room for us to rapidly deploy renewables, bring down our power costs, hedge against volatile fuels like natural gas that skyrocket when Russia invades, Ukraine. So we have to push as much renewables as possible in the short term, medium term, and long term. That's the answer.
Thank you. Next question, we're going to start with Keisha Waits. Keisha, what plans do you propose to support more cost-saving renewable options, such as solar and battery storage?
Great question. Currently, Georgia Power has a buyback program that I think is perfect. The challenge is very, very few people know anything about it. And so what we have to do is figure out ways to make solar more cost effective for the average consumer. And I think we do that through increasing the funding as it relates to the buyback program. I also support increasing caps to allow more homeowners to benefit from the program. And this includes utilizing public service agreements, social media to get the word out to individuals that Georgia Power currently has incentives for families to take advantage of solar.
Thank you so much. Same question to Daniel Blackman.
Yeah, I think, and I want to make sure I'm answering the question correctly. So can you repeat it really quickly, sir?
Absolutely. What plans do you propose to support more cost-saving renewable options such as solar and battery storage?
Yeah, the first thing I'm going to do, I mean, and I don't say this in a sarcastic way, is helping to get Alicia Johnson elected to the Public Service Commission so we can have multiple fronts that are working to make sure as public service commissioners we establish that. Look, we need more people like my colleagues on this call right now that believe in renewable energy, that believe in cost savings, they believe in storage. Look, we can no longer expect a public service commission who's uneducated, unqualified, and appointed by the governor because they've donated to his campaign to make decisions about solar and battery storage. Some of the ideas that I have is working directly with the communities and the county governments around the state, county commissions, excuse me, on ensuring that they're well educated and well positioned, engaging all of our utilities, including our EMCs. I mean, we have to start thinking about the finance portion of this. A lot of times people hear about the regulatory process, but the finance authority of the Public Service Commission is going to be very critical. I also have a very strong working relationship with the private sector. You know, we're actually working, we as in my organization, with one of the largest financial institutions in the United States to bring climate finance and funding to rural areas across the country. So what I would do is work the relationships that I have, encourage the other commissioners. Look, we have to be able to work with the other 4 commissioners once we get there. And I'm planning on making sure that if they are adversarial to moving forward in solar investment, we find the right partners, we put them on notice, we educate the population, and we make sure that we put those ideas forward.
Thank you. Peter Hubbard, what do you think?
Yeah, I've got a number of ideas, and I'd encourage you once again to go to the website, Georgia Center for Energy Solutions, where I've got a lot. But, number one is proper remuneration, the payback for residential solar and battery storage. Right now you pay 21 cents a kilowatt hour for the solar for the energy that you buy in the summertime. You only get paid about 8 cents or so when you put extra power back onto the grid, and compare that as well to what the data center's sweetheart deal is of around 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So, giving the proper payback for that power you export to the grid is a big reason why we only have 5,000 or so rooftop customers, whereas North Carolina, Florida, they have 70, 80, 90,000. So we're far behind there. Number two, you can aggregate those things into what's called a virtual power plant. Basically, instead of building a new power plant, you just you can basically have that same amount of capacity without building it using software. It's because there's so much extra capacity in the grids. And then third, a new electricity tariff that provides for a small amount of curtailment of these new large data centers customers, just a couple of like a percent or two of hours out of the year when they might be asked to pull back on the power demand, and we can accommodate 9,000 megawatts of data center load growth, the same amount Georgia Power is asking for in this integrated resource plan. We have lots of options.
Thank you. Robert Jones, same question.
I would approach the question from the standpoint of fairness. I mentioned earlier the Clean Energy Business Association. They are generating electricity that they'll be selling back into Georgia Power. If you look at these large data centers, they have their own electric generational backup facilities there because they have to keep up and running. It is easily viable that if you live in a surrounding neighborhood, you might have the choice of actually getting some of your electricity from a data center versus directly from Georgia Power. Now, you can believe the monopoly is going to dig in deep to try to prevent that. But from a fairness standpoint, if the state is providing incentives through tax abatements to data centers, then we need to be further incentivizing rooftop solar energy, and in terms of making sure when they sell their excess electricity back into the grid, they're getting market rates and not these really penalized rates, which disincentivizes the ability to go after these opportunities. So all of this is ripe for really transformation. It is extremely, extremely threatening for Georgia Power because suddenly the monopoly starts having to compete now for business, and they've never done that before. But I think it's good for consumers. It helps us move to a clean energy environment and puts us on the right path for decarbonization.
Thank you. This next question, we're going to start off with Daniel Blackman. Daniel, the Trump administration just extended the deadline for coal factories by 2 years to comply with pollution standards on chemicals such as mercury, arsenic, and benzene. This affects Plant Bowen in North Georgia and Plant Shearer in Middle Georgia. These plants were supposed to be closed, but Georgia Power is now asking for them to remain open. How would you address this?
Well, the first thing I can say is that's a travesty. No one on this call that has ever gone through any type of loss, whether it's been a foreclosure or the extension of a bill without a late fee, gets the kind of incentives that the fossil fuel industry has gotten. How much time are we going to give them? When you look at Plant Share, when you look at Plant Bowen, look, I've spent time there. I've actually been on site. I've been with the folks down in Juliet, Georgia, that have been struggling with coal ash. As a matter of fact, we overperformed in Republican districts where there were these coal fire plants, and they have been struggling. There's a massive frustration around the United States that we continuously are slapping these multi-billion-dollar industries on the wrist, extending their time, giving them incentives, and allowing them to be profitable in the process. We can no longer do this. We even saw the rollback of a recent PFAS rule by the Trump administration. The Trump administration has drawn the line in the sand at the federal level that they are not concerned about human health and the environment. They are doing it in Republican districts, in Democratic districts, in rural areas. And one of the things that I want to commit myself to is to continue to mobilize and organize the people in these areas, including the potential of hosting a hearing, a meeting, or a town hall type discussion in both the areas of Plant Share and Plant Bowen. We're already coordinating one in Macon, Georgia, Houston County, and also Juliet. Those are the areas where we need people to be on board, and then we need to lobby the legislative body to make sure that bad actor legislation is in place throughout the state of Georgia.
Thank you so much. Peter Hubbard.
Yeah, so I actually used, well, I should start with saying that those coal plants should have been closed a long time ago. They lose money. I know this. I know this for a fact because I also, I've done a lot of analysis that I published on my website. I actually used a small amount of that data center compute power to analyze the Georgia Power Company Integrated Resource Plan, this 2025 IRP, and what we should be building in Georgia in terms of power grid and renewable energy. And I can tell you that when you put in the true costs, you do not see that coal remain. It is retired at the first opportunity. It does take some time to retire it. We have to plan for that and make sure that there are resources in place when that capacity goes away. We need to be mindful of the community that's going to lose those jobs and that economic impact. But I promise you that there's many more benefits to be gained by embracing and by retiring those coal units, not replacing them with natural gas-fired units like Georgia Power Company is proposing to do, secretly doing already, and replacing that coal capacity with clean and affordable and reliable solar and battery storage, as well as sharing with neighbors and other low-cost resources. So there's just no reason to keep them open. And they're only doing it based on just this false premise that we need baseload power. It's simply not true. And my analysis confirms that. So I encourage you to visit that website again.
Thank you. Robert Jones.
Yeah, I would come at it slightly different. In terms of in answering your question, the approach I would take as a commissioner would be to partner with the legislative representatives to really update Section 515 of the state code. Now, I imagine nobody here on this call has actually read Section 515 of the state code, but I was surprised in going through it. There is very little mention around the importance of emissions, carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases. And when you read the IRP that was submitted by Georgia Power, where it talks about this section, it all refers to conversations they're having with the Department of Natural Resources. And they're referring back to the Department of Energy and the federal government. So the commission as it exists today is really not having the conversations that are needed for the benefit of all of us from a public standpoint around what it means in terms of emissions, carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases in terms of the environment as we generate more electricity there. So I would certainly like to see the state code move to incorporate some of those provisions from the Department of Natural Resources into the Public Service Commission. And I think we have an opportunity there because coming out of the most recent state legislature, they asked the PSC to take a look at potentially regulating water. So I see that as an opening that, in fact, yes, let's bring on water. Let's also bring in the whole carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas emissions discussion as well and put it from a regulatory standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. Keisha Waits.
Thank you for the question. So I think representation truly matters in this area. The PSC policies directly impact public health, and the energy sources that we rely on and how we regulate them certainly impact, women, children, and families. But for me, I would simply, again, push for a health equity assessment and tie this to permitting, tie this to infrastructural planning, things of that nature, working with the local and state levels of government so that we can hold individuals accountable. Environmental justice is becoming increasingly linked to regulatory issues, and this includes grid expansion, where we put landfills, where we put data centers, things of that nature, how close it's related to schools and things of that nature. So for me, it's about utilizing data to drive decisions that we will be making as a member of the PSC.
Thank you so much. And I was looking at my production notes, and the good people at the DeKalb County Democratic Party asked for a hard stop at 7:03 to take audience questions, and we're going to make sure we get the audience questions. So I'm going to jump ahead on my question list and get one more question that we came up with, and then we're going to jump into the audience questions. Is that okay with everybody? Great. Starting with Peter Hubbard. Peter, the Public Service Commissioners accept significant financial contributions from Georgia Power, its employees, contractors, and legal team. What should be done to address this apparent conflict of interest?
Well, I plan to shine a spotlight on this corruption, this corrupt practice, and use the bully pulpit of a commissioner. Sunlight is not only great for producing clean, reliable, and affordable energy, but sunlight is also the best disinfectant to expose and deter these kinds of corrupt practices like what the current Republic commissioners are doing. And so I will shout from the rooftops as well that the attorneys, for example, who represent Georgia Power Company in the 2025 Integrated Resource Plan, they should not be donating directly to the commissioners with whom they have business. It's corruption out in the open, and we just need to hold these commissioners accountable, and no one is doing that, and I plan to.
Thank you. Robert Jones.
I resist using the word corruption because it's legal. But just because it's legal doesn't make it right. So I hope all of you who are out there right now, you have a pencil in hand, please write this down. Go take a look at Georgia Code Title 21-5-30.1. And I guarantee you'll be pounding your forehead. There's 4 sections to it. The first 3 are very strongly worded to prevent contributions from utilities to regulatory commissions. And the 4th section opens the door and waters it down completely. That basically sanctions this atrocious behavior. So this is going to require, again, working with the state legislature, and let's get that loophole off the books because it is basically just legalized graft, and let's call it what it is.
Thank you. Keisha Waits.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Absolutely. It is about conflict of interest. Specifically, the question is public service commissioners accept significant financial contributions from Georgia Power, its employees, contractors, and legal team. What should be done about this apparent conflict of interest?
I think this is another opportunity to work directly with the members of the General Assembly to put measures in place. And I'll give you an example. As a member of the General Assembly, you're not allowed to take any donations of funding during the legislative period. And so for that reason, I don't think we should take any funding from individuals that we will be regulating and or making decisions over. And that includes campaign donations. And so I think we should put measures in place and partner with the Assembly to change the rules as it relates to who we can accept funding from, and also have a cooling off period as it relates to votes, or at least call for a Section 32, which is something that they do in most legislative bodies when there is a conflict of interest.
Thank you so much. Daniel Blackman, last word.
I want to thank the panel. I want to thank all that coordinated. And I want to apologize to my fellow panelists as well as to the people of DeKalb County. I am double committed and explained earlier to this panel that I would have to depart to go to another location. So I want to truly apologize for not being able to complete this. That being said, I will not and have not ever taken any campaign resources from any utility company or anyone that I would regulate. I agree with the sentiment of everyone on this call. It is asinine that the two incumbents that are on the ballot this year have collectively taken over $600,000 from utility companies. I won't say that again. If you look at their disclosures, they have taken upwards of $600,000+ collectively from utility companies. It is not fair. It is not just. And how can we trust anyone in any scenario that takes this kind of money? My closing statement. I want to close on the statement, if I may, with the question that was posed in the chat about what the Public Service Commission can do to fund utility assistance programs for moderate income households. That is a question that can only really be answered at the state and federal level. The Public Service Commission does not necessarily do that. However, we can, when we're seeing or overhearing rate cases, we can address that. Before I finish that last statement, I do apologize to the moderator. I was told that I can close the statement. So is that okay?
You're fine. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I saw 10 seconds. I want to be respectful. The thing I was saying was at the federal and the state level. This is very critical because the low-income heat and energy assistance program was frozen as of February of this year under the current Trump administration. We need to work more. You have heard it a lot of times from all of the folks on this call that we have to work with the legislative body to educate them and push for those policies. I intend to work on not only strengthening the grid, but using my federal background to ensure that we can have safe and reliable rates and that we can protect the consumers and ratepayers in this state. I want to thank you specifically, maybe against my campaign's wishes, but to Robert Jones, to Peter Hubbard, to Keisha Waits, I am so thankful that we are sharpening our swords as Democrats and ensuring that we can be the strongest to represent you. I hope that person will be me in the primary, and I look forward to coordinating with each of you in DeKalb County. Thank you so much. My website is danielforgeorgia.com. That's Daniel, F-O-R, Georgia.com. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Daniel. And with that, we're going to move into reader questions, audience questions. And we're going to start with one from Kathy. And we'll start the answers with Robert Jones. Robert, Kathy asks, what will you do to make Public Service Commission proceedings more transparent and ensure citizens can participate meaningfully?
Yeah, when I mentioned that I had tried to influence change from outside the process, I had gone down to the commissioners and actually gave them feedback around what I experienced from the outside with some very, very straightforward things in terms of being able to send out notifications for that people sign up and send them a notification of certain events. I showed the commission how they can take their video recordings and automatically use YouTube to have it create a transcript and post that transcript to their calendar. So I don't have to sit through the video. I can actually read through it and search through it. And then the other is to actually now get out of Atlanta and actually hold some of these proceedings in other parts of the state. Okay, because one of the challenges I've been facing as I've been traveling around the states is everything's kind of around Georgia Power in District 3. You get into an EMC and they're wondering like, why am I voting on the District 3 candidacy there when I'm not a Georgia Power customer? So the commission has really insulated itself. It's too cozy with Georgia Power. It's avoiding the public. It's avoiding for secrecy. And so all of this is very much around driving for greater transparency, getting in front of forums, meetings like this, and bringing the issues forward and letting people respond to it. It's like campaigning, okay? You just keep doing it.
Thank you. Keisha Waits.
Thank you. Certainly, educating voters surrounding the significance and/or importance of the PSC is going to be crucial. And to my colleague's point, I think you do that through Townhouse. You do that through traveling around the state of Georgia and getting out of Atlanta. We have a very, very robust social media environment where people often get information and news from those areas. And so I'd like to see that. I think we do that through public awareness campaigns. That is utilizing social media, radio, news, so that individuals will be informed should there be any conversation surrounding rate hikes or data centers coming into a community. The communities should know that first. Most people are not even aware that we're expanding them currently in Jackson County, Douglas County, and things of that nature. So I think we do that through community engagement.
Thank you. Peter Hubbard, same question.
Yeah, the work of the Public Service Commission is incredibly important. We're talking about billions of dollars. Most people don't know what it does. There was a bill to actually rename it the Public Utilities Commission, so it'd be more apparent. But that failed to, I think, get out of committee. The work that I've been doing for 6 years at the nonprofit Georgia Center for Energy Solutions is an attempt to really get the information out there. It's incredibly complicated. I have to use every bit of my physics and economics background to delve into these power projects, the power plans, and understand, what makes them move and translate that to a general audience so that you can understand the impact on your power bills. And that's important work, but it's difficult to do. I do also, so I'll continue to kind of publish through newsletters, websites, but also visit all 159 counties if I am able to. Tim Eccles, the incumbent in District 2, supplements his income with about 40 to 50,000 in travel each year, visiting different places and drumming up more donations and business. So there's a travel budget if you'd like to get out and meet with the public. And as a public service commissioner, that's what I'll do.
Thank you. We're going to start this next question with Keisha Waits. Keisha, this question comes from, I think it's pronounced Gian. I apologize if I got that wrong. But they ask, will you as a commissioner work to reinstate solar monthly net metering?
I can tell you that's not an area that I'm familiar with. However, I think that's spot on. I think any uh, initiative that moves us towards solar is in the right direction as it relates to renewable energy sources. And so, to answer your question, certainly that's something that I would be very much interested in championing and getting more information out to the public surrounding that initiative.
Thank you. Peter Hubbard, same question.
Yeah, it's I talked about this where you pay 21 cents a kilowatt hour for the power you buy. What you sell back with your excess solar is only about 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's just not a fair deal. That's what the net metering is all about. And it doesn't become an issue. There is a cost shift that occurs there, but it's very negligible until you have a lot of rooftops with solar on it. And you just don't see that in Georgia yet. We have far too low penetration. So you have to get to California levels before you start to see some things that you need to address. So net metering, yes. And I think it should be not quite at the same level as what you're paying Georgia Power Company, 21 cents, but it should be far closer to that level, not 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So yes, all for it with a phase out over many, many years far down the road.
Thank you. Robert Jones.
So yes, similar to Peter's comment, I mean, I think the way the tariffs are written right now, it's called net billing, but it's kind of the same thing, which is if you have rooftop solar and a battery, you can sell your excess back into the grid. And it's based on a formula that starts at 4 cents and it has something that's got, they call avoided cost on top of it. And that's working out to about 7 to 8 cents right now. That avoided cost projection, I looked out for what Georgia Power filed 20 years into the future, and they're saying it's only going to change 1% a year. And I'm like, wait a minute now, our prices are going up, oh, let's see, 43% in the last 2 years, but Georgia Power believes their cost is only going to go up by 1% a year over the next 20 years. So I think the price really should be, as Peter just said, really in that 14 to 15%, 14 to 15 cent per kilowatt range. And when you do that now, the payback period of your investment in terms of rooftop solar and battery comes from 10 years down to 5 years. So now you're actually fully recovering your investment during the depreciation schedule. And so, again, this is a tactic to detour and disincentivize customers from actually having an alternative to the monopoly. And so we need to write that from a pure economic standpoint and be fair to the marketplace.
Thank you so much. I apologize. I might have gone out of order on the question, so I apologize to the good folks at the DeKalb County Democratic Party. I went bottom to top instead of top to bottom, but we're going to try to go back in order. Starting with Peter Hubbard, this question comes from Michael Beach. Michael, at a minimum, why are data centers not required to produce renewable energy on their roofs and land, as well as pay their fair share and energy use through their rates?
Great question. The data center roofs, they don't occupy a big footprint, and most of that rooftop is used with evaporative boilers to take care. That's where all the water consumption comes from to dissipate the heat from your server racks. to do it with clean energy on site, you would need, for some of these very large data centers, you would need thousands of acres of solar. So you're not going to be able to site it right there. But thankfully, we have a transmission grid, and so you can site it where land is cheaper, and through a contractual arrangement, have that data center be supplied with clean energy. And that's what a lot of data centers are doing. They want clean energy. They're not going to settle for fossil. And then I think the second part of the question, could you just repeat it quickly, Dan?
Sure. At a minimum, why are data centers not required to produce renewable energy on their roofs and land, as well as pay their fair share of energy use through their rates?
Yeah, pay their fair share. Just to follow that up really quickly. I mean, clearly there was a cost shift occurring with our power bills going up and with and the reason why the Public Service Commission issued that last minute 11th hour rule to say they're not going to allow these data centers to shift the cost onto residential payers. So as a commissioner, you can hold the line on that, and that's what I intend to do on those cost allocations to data centers and make them pay their fair share.
Thank you. Robert Jones, same question.
Yeah, very similar to Peter's answer. I mean, part of the issue is that we have incentivized these data centers to come into Georgia. We've incentivized them with tax abatements. They're getting what I believe are low market energy costs. And so they aren't really facing what is the true economic environmental cost that would basically influence their decision there. The state legislature was taking steps to remove those subsidies. The governor vetoed them. So right now, these data centers are going to be struggling to figure out how do they reach profitability given the investment they're going in. So they're going to be looking to try to basically take some of the electricity on their facilities, sell that back into the grid. And then I want to go back to kind of the CEBA agreement, the Clean Energy Business Association, which was specifically organized to produce large-scale clean energy for data centers. And so it is sad that they have been sidelined from this IRP because I think they would help really shed light on how much we really can solve through a clean energy solution standpoint.
Thank you. Keisha Waite, same question.
Great. I think my colleagues have pretty much answered the question thoroughly, but to piggyback, Senate Bill 34, I think would have moved us in the right direction. I think they don't look at renewable energy sources because they're simply not mandated to do so. And I want to go back to that conversation surrounding stipulated agreements. This is an opportunity to put it in there. We can put it in a community benefit agreement. We have to have individuals who are on the commission who demand and mandate that they do those things. And I think that's the difference in coming from a policy and legislative background. Lastly, I applaud Governor Kemp for incentivizing Georgia to do business. I think that's a good thing. I am not anti-business, but we cannot place these burdens on the backs of ratepayers, which is what we have done in the state of Georgia. And I think now with what you're saying politically, whereas they've made the decision to freeze rates, I think you now see the result of these conversations during a political campaign, where we're having that type of impact. So certainly, if we are successful in electing 2 Democrats to the PSC, I think we can move us in the right direction. And finally, paying their fair share. Our colleagues have talked about the fact that they pay 40% less than any other entity. And then lastly, there are $296 million in incentives that have been given out globally. And so those are some things that I think we can do to move us into the right direction.
Thank you. We're going to ask this question from Onika, and we're going to start with Robert Jones. Robert, Anika asks, what can the Public Service Commissioner do to help fund utility assistance programs for moderate income households? Sometimes programs are available for low income, but moderate income households may need help as well once in a while.
Yeah, my experience has been what we call lifeline assistance, and they were targeted toward low income households. From a moderate income perspective, you're really talking about those families and homes that are on the margin between moderate income and low income. And so really you'd be looking at, do we basically expand the band of those from an eligibility standpoint? And that really would be a collective that you would want to facilitate between the utility, between the state, and between community assistance programs. The unfortunate thing, and well, I won't say it's unfortunate depending on your point of view, but we all saw that the governor signed into law essentially a $500 tax rebate to households. The question is, was that the best use from a social standpoint in terms of those funds versus benefiting those that are on the margin between a moderate and low income perspective? Um, that ship has sailed. But in fact, I would say we do need to take a more deeper, serious look because more families are slipping down the economic curve. And so this issue is not going to go away. If anything, it's going to get worse.
Thank you. Keisha Wade, same question.
Well, we've already talked about the fact that there is a need to expand the low-income energy assistance project, but we also need to improve consumer protections, and that is stricter regulations surrounding disconnections. I think that that's one of the things that we can do to do some work in that area, such as extending the grace period, requiring additional notifications for individuals who are having a hard time, but also to help prevent unnecessary interruptions. And then the other thing that I think is important is that we take a look at this buyback program that's offered regarding solar. Too many people don't have access to that for funding reasons. And so I support increasing the buyback rate to make it more affordable for everyday average households who are working families to buy into and consider utilizing solar energy.
Thank you. Peter Hubbard.
It's a great question, and certainly there's a lot of need for low income, but the question was about moderate income and what can we do there. And so, there's a lot that we can do. And so I kind of want to disagree with what was said previously to the first response to this question. As a commissioner, you can actually do a lot. You don't have to leave it to the state legislature at federal levels. Commissioner, you have the authority to put into a stipulation agreement a line item for a project that's specifically targeted for moderate income customers of Georgia Power Company. You can also, in the rate case, there's dozens of tariffs. That's the rate that you pay for electricity, depending on your customer class and how you use that energy. As a commissioner, you can also compel them to present a tariff that would have those incentives and the right rate design to benefit moderate income customers. One of the things I think you can actively do, though, is to just give that fair buyback rate for rooftop solar and storage. And also offer things like a bring your own battery program where you might install that battery or solar at your house, but then you'll get like a tax credit, 30%, 40%, something like that. And there's a huge benefit. You can use that to avoid building big power plants. There's money to pay for that. So there's lots of options to lower costs for and hold costs in check for moderate income customers, as well as just stopping the rate increases.
Thank you. We're going to have time for one more audience question, and then we're going to move into closing statements. We'll start with Keisha for this one. Keisha, what specific steps, this is from Robbie Owenby, by the way, what specific steps would you take as a public service commissioner to make Georgia's energy grid more resilient against extreme weather and climate disruptions? And do you believe Georgia Power is doing enough in this area? And if not, where are the gaps?
Well, one of the reasons that Georgia Power asked for some of the rate increases is that they cited some of the challenges that we faced recently with the storms that hit Georgia in the last couple of years, including insurance companies have talked about the need to pay out a lot of funds in that area. So as it relates to the grid, certainly they're collecting the dollars from the consumer. So I think that that's the important piece. I think the way that we answer that question, though, would be an audit. And that is when you look at what ratepayers are paying, are we getting the cost benefit for what we're putting out in terms of the incentives that we're paying out throughout the state, as well as what ratepayers are paying? As it relates to the grid, we don't want to be dealing with some of the challenges that Puerto Rico is having. For example, there are constant power outages. And so I certainly understand the need to balance the needs for infrastructural improvements. But again, we don't want to do that on the backs of ratepayers. And so what I support is continue some of the incentives, but to make sure that there's a cost benefit agreement to the communities that are directly impacted, one by pollution, as well as any other challenges for lower income communities that are having a hard time.
Thank you. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd stop the feedback loop of fossil gas that's exacerbating this climate challenge, right? Fossil gas plants are thermal generators. They need water. And in a drought, they can't provide reliable energy. So natural gas, fossil gas is not a reliable generator. That's how I would help to make the grid in Georgia more reliable and resilient is by transitioning away from unreliable fossil gas towards reliable, clean, and affordable solar and battery storage. I mean, there's more to say, but I'll leave it there.
Sounds good. Robert Jones.
The best and optimal strategy for resiliency of the network is to underground the facilities. Now, so that means wherever you have a new development going in, and utilities, I think, are pretty much doing this already, they bury the facilities. The question becomes for all of those communities that have been built up over the century, it is basically cost prohibitive to go through and now start undergrounding those facilities. But you have to have a very clear, dedicated plan to recognize the fact that where we are right now in terms of our climate evolution, we're going to see a higher frequency, more intensity number of extreme weather events that are going to be damaging the network. That means from a planning and execution standpoint, we have to target where we're most vulnerable and really focus the undergrounding of facilities in those areas to put us the best protection. It's going to be a long process. It's a new way of going ahead and doing transmission regulation and energy delivery. Most, I think, of the utilities are looking at it seriously right now, and it's just one of execution relative to available funding.
Thank you. And that brings us to the close of our questions for tonight. We're going to give each candidate 90 seconds to give a closing statement. Peter, we're going to start with you.
Well, thank you once again to my fellow panelists, to the moderators, to, the invitation to be here is excellent. I want to reiterate that I do think that democracy is strengthened by having such good candidates with such expertise and passion for this. And I hope you see that I have that expertise and passion. I think you'll see that on display next week as I testify before the Public Service Commission in the 2025 Integrated Resource Plan. I hope you tune into that. And I just want you to understand that there's a lot of work to be done. You need someone who understands this in the detail that I do, who's been doing the work. And I just hope you understand and see that there's a lot of good enthusiasm and expertise that I bring to the table. And so I encourage you all to visit the information that I published at Georgia Center for Energy Solutions again. And most importantly, come out to vote June 17th. So thank you all, and I really appreciate all of your time and attention.
Thank you. Robert Jones.
Thank you also for the forum as well. I think this is fantastic. I've enjoyed the conversation. Just as a reminder, I've never run a campaign before, and I didn't enter this race just to win the primary and not succeed in the general. So my focus is really on the person who's been occupying the District 3 seat from our area, who's probably been somewhat invisible. That's where my focus is. I'm continuing to campaign on it. I hope you've had a chance to really examine my qualifications, my expertise acquired over a career of experience. A lot of the feedback that I've gotten from voters as I've gone around the state is, wow, it's highly educational. I didn't understand how in-depth it was to really understand regulation, monopoly behavior, how it disrupts the marketplace, the abuses that monopolies can do. And so I'm really about trying to change the way by which you are being served from a public standpoint to reinstill the institution, to make sure you have confidence and the trust that we're making decisions that are in your best interest. And a lot of the partisan graft that's going on that's really harmed the institution itself needs to be reinvigorated. So with me, you get somebody who's going to walk in on day one and go to work right away because I've done these issues. I'm not running this campaign to be a public service administrator. I'm running this campaign to be a public service leader to transform the way regulation is being done. Thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to your voting.
Thank you. Keisha Waits.
Thank you. Representation definitely matters. Georgia has had a long history of underrepresentation, specifically as it relates to regulatory issues. The people who are the greatest impacted are often never at the table or a part of these conversations. It is my belief that we have to have an individual who has a track record of fighting for working families, that has relationships at the local, county, and state levels of government. I bring that to the table. And so I'm excited about this opportunity. I will not be a continued rubber stamp for the Public Service Commission. And to my colleague's point, this conversation is about also viability, and that is who can win in November. This is an unprecedented opportunity to address many of the challenges that we've talked about tonight. There is no point in us highlighting all of these issues, but yet we lose in November. So it is my hope that we will rally together. I am happy to support whoever the nominee. I am hopeful that I will be blessed to have that opportunity. But nonetheless, this is about us uniting and ensure that we put two Democrats in the seat of the PSC, and hopefully next year we can also move us forward. But this is about lowering energy costs, making sure we have a voice at the table that will fight for Georgia families. I intend to do that as soon as possible as your next Public Service Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha. Thank you to all the candidates who joined us tonight and took questions from us, took questions from the audience. Thank you for your interest in public service and generally, not just the Public Service Commission. We really need candidates to step in and fill these seats, particularly the seats like the Public Service Commission where people might not know a whole lot about it. So we thank you for that. My name is Dan Wisenhunt. I'm the editor and founder of Decatorish.com. You can see all of our news over at Decatorish.com. And to become a paying supporter of Decatorish and support free local news for DeKalb County, please visit supportyourlocalnews.com. And with that, I will turn it back over to Brandy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dan. That was wonderful moderating. And thank you again to each of our candidates. If you have been paying attention for the last hour and a half, I am sure that you are more educated now than you probably were before. And I want to thank all of our candidates for just your honest answers and everything that you are looking to do with your platforms should you be elected. Before we wrap up tonight, I do want to highlight two things. One, as you've heard stated here tonight, while District 3, the representative for District 3, the commission representative for District 3 would represent DeKalb, there are actually two commission elections that are happening, and we will all vote statewide. So I would highly encourage you to make yourself familiar with other candidates on the ballot in District 2 as well. The second thing that I wanted to also share, again, as you've heard, the plethora of information from our candidates, and we are so grateful to have you here tonight. The Georgia Public Service Commission actually holds regularly scheduled meetings every Tuesday at 9 a.m. You may attend in person. Those are held in room 110 at 344 Washington Street in Atlanta, Georgia, 30334, or you can view live on the Commission's YouTube channel. The PCS website also has a list of resources for low-income utility assistance as well as for senior citizen discounts, and you can go to psc.go.gov for that information. There are also a number of watchdog groups such as the Georgians for Healthy Future and Georgia Watch that support staying informed on the commission information. So I would highly recommend you staying connected to those as well. And again, thank you to everyone for being here with us tonight. Before we close, I am going to pass it over to Steve Parker to wrap us up with final thoughts and send a special thank you to all of our participants as well as the team who helped put this on. Steve?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all of the candidates and our army of volunteers who put this forum together. Dan Wisenhunt as moderator, Madam Chair Brandy, technical crew Amy Farrow, Dr. Bola Tillman, Denise Peterson, Val Flowery, Leona Perry, and Larry Lowe, and our question writers Susan McWethy, Ann Abramowitz, and Mike Greenwald. Thank you all. While we are volunteers who present things like this to inform citizens, we do have expenses and ask for your financial support. Please consider a small amount or a monthly recurring donation of $30 to Power Democrats here in DeKalb. Please check your voter registration to make sure it is up to date, and please note these important dates. Early voting will be held May 27th through June 13th, 7 to 7, Monday through Friday. We have Saturday voting on May 31st and June 7th from 9 a.m. to 6, as well as two Sundays, June 1st and June 8th from 12 to 5. Again, Election Day is June 17th. If there is a runoff, Election Day will be July 15th. The primary winner will then go on to the ballot on November 4th. Please vote for the Democrat. A recording of this forum is available for viewing and sharing on our YouTube channel, as well as 2 webinars that DeKalb Dibs recently presented about what the PSC does and the health challenges that stem from their decisions. These links are in the chat. Please visit DeKalbDims.com to discover more ways to engage in activities right here in DeKalb County. We are currently building our communities and encourage you to connect with them for local events and calls to actions that affect your neighbors. Finally, it was a pleasure for DeKalb Dims to present this information to you tonight. We wish each candidate a successful campaign. Thanks for joining us, and we wish you all a great evening. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.